All right, guys. So you've seen both of these guests on the show before. Scott Ritter, we were, I think, doing an interview. Our timing has been the kind of the strangest, Scott. The first time we did our first interview ever was when Iran was responding to Israel live, and we saw the missiles strike Israel. And the second time was when Iran was responding to the US and striking the base. And Jonathan, we've spoken in the early days of the conflict. I think we had an interview just after Scott. And we've also spoken, I don't know if you remember this, but not long after October 7th, when you were doing those spaces. We had a very brief discussion back then. So it's a pleasure to have you guys. And I really wanted to have that discussion, kind of a debate format, where we go back and forth, because you're both very knowledgeable, but you also differ on so many points. I think there's a lot of things you'll agree on, but in most cases you will disagree, which I think will make for a really interesting conversation. For anyone that doesn't know, Scott, you're a former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer and a former UN Special Commission weapons inspector in Iraq, where you oversaw Iraq's disarmament of weapons of mass destruction in the 1990s. Jonathan, you're a retired lieutenant colonel of the IDF, where you served for 24 years, notably as the international spokesperson. And then you came back as a spokesperson after October 7th for a short period of time, I think about 3 months. And now you're a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Gentlemen, pleasure to have you both. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to start with the most polarizing question first. And I'm going to actually begin with Scott. I'm not sure, Jonathan, if you know Scott's position, because that's actually one thing that me and Scott kind of went back and forth on 2 days ago. Scott, you saw this, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you saw this more of a win for Iran in many ways. Is that correct? And if so, can you just elaborate on your perspective there? And then, Jonathan, I'd love your take on it.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's very difficult in wartime. Anybody who's participating in combat, it's always difficult to speak about winning, because war is about destruction, it's about death. And I think as much as Iran delivered pain to Israel, Israel delivered pain to Iran. I think that's one of the reasons why both nations accepted this ceasefire as rapidly as they did. But, let's just start from foundational aspects. One, we have the whole issue of global perception. Israel, of course, can articulate why they felt the need to attack Iran the way they did. But from the global perspective, it's a violation of the United Nations Charter, Article 2, Paragraph 4. Israel hasn't articulated a cognizable claim under Article 51. They haven't gone to the Security Council to make this claim. And so from many points of view, this is an illegal war of aggression, which automatically puts Israel in the loser block. That's up there with Imperial Japan attacking the United States on Pearl Harbor, etc. Two, if you're going to do this, if you're going to say, okay, we're going to take the risk of alienating the world, then let's see why you did this. Israel said that Iran's nuclear program posed an existential threat to Israel and to other nations because they had achieved a certain threshold status. Now, that's debatable given the fact that we had ongoing negotiations with the Iranians where they were willing to step back from almost every aspect of this verifiably. But let's just assume that you say you can't trust the Iranians. If your goal was to eliminate the Iranian nuclear program, their enrichment program, Israel failed. So they failed in that objective. Many aspects of their initial strike was regime change. It appeared that they're going for a decapitation strike. Indeed, some of the comments made by Benjamin Netanyahu afterwards was, step aside, let us finish this task of destroying your facilities, and then we can get on in peace and harmony. I think focusing more on the Iranian president and the foreign minister, who are known moderates, and trying to eliminate the IRGC and the more hardcore Iranian officers. While they did succeed in killing a number of people, there's no doubt about that, including 14 scientists, and we can get into the efficacy of that. The point is, there wasn't regime change. In fact, if that was the objective, it failed, because the regime today, by many accounts, is stronger than ever. The Iranian people have rallied around the regime. And again, we get back to the nuclear aspect. 400 kilograms of uranium hexafluoride enriched to 60% is unaccounted for. No one knows where it is. Israel doesn't know where it is. We don't know where it is. We know where it's not. It's not beneath the ground in Natanz. It's not beneath the ground in Isfahan. It's not beneath the ground in Fordo. The other thing is the centrifuges. Some people say you can't remove the centrifuges that were in Fordo and in Natanz. Maybe, maybe not, but it doesn't matter because since 2021, I think February of 2021, Iran stopped reporting centrifuge production to the IAEA. And the fact is today, Iran has the potential of having thousands of functional centrifuges that are outside the scope and scale of IAEA knowledge, therefore outside the scope and scale of what the United States and Israel know about. So if you take the uranium hexafluoride 60%, you take centrifuges, and you take the reality that Iran has dozens of Fordo-like hide sites throughout the nation that nobody knows about, all you've done is enable Iran to secret away the key aspects of a nuclear weaponization program without IAEA monitoring. And now what you've done is you've sort of pissed the Iranians off. They said, if you attack our nuclear sites, we can reverse the fatwa about the prohibition about nuclear weapons. Now, they haven't done that yet, but from the Israeli perspective, I mean, how is this a victory? Uranium hexafluoride unaccounted for, centrifuges unaccounted for, a pissed off Iranian government that still possesses missiles that did a hell of a lot of damage to Israel. Does Israel really want to repeat this cycle again? I just see this as a loss for Israel. Again, hats off to the Israeli military. You guys knocked the crap out of the Iranians. You really did. And the Iranians acknowledge it. But they knocked the crap out of you too.
So you've covered a lot of the points that we'll be debating. And Jonathan, I want you to go through each point. I've actually written them down because I want your perspective on each one of them. So we're starting with the broad perspective. The points that were mentioned by Scott were whether the war was legal or illegal. I want you to comment on that. Second, the comparison to Pearl Harbor. Third is whether Iran's nuclear program was an existential threat. So all these three are within, as in one point, the legality of it, or that it's justified. Number two is whether Israel failed to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities. And the third one is regime change. Was that an objective? And if so, did it fail?
Right. So let's be serious here for a second. The Islamic Republic of Iran, its regime, has an outspoken official goal, which they have not been hiding. They've been saying it in Farsi for a long time, and that is to annihilate the state of Israel. Up until a few days ago, they had a countdown clock in a square called Palestine Square, and the name of the square is not coincidental, where they were counting down from the year 2040, which they call the last day of what they dubbed the Zionist entity, what I call the State of Israel. They've said numerous times, official statements by the so-called supreme leader, he's not very supreme these days, but Khamenei, and various presidents going back 10, 15 years and until now, various military leaders, head of the IRGC, head of the Quds Force, the previous and the current one, and many other, and of course, members of parliament, legislators, heads of the Iranian military. The list goes on and on and on about Iranian officials that have said clearly that they aim to annihilate and destroy the state of Israel, what they call the Zionist entity. So in terms of understanding where we stand, where Israel stands, it's a pretty straightforward situation. Israel is threatened by an Islamic regime. That regime was also on the path of developing nuclear weapons. And there is abundant evidence from the Atomic Agency, Israeli intel, American intel. We can discuss and deliberate details about it, but bottom line, the Iranians were building a nuclear weapons program. They were busy not only enriching to military grade levels, 60 and 90%, they were also weaponizing and experimenting and trying to develop the capacity to turn enriched material into fissile and then turn that into a bomb and then put all of those things together in a delivery system, probably a ballistic missile that they had thousands of before this engagement. And the aim here is pretty clear. They say that they want to destroy and annihilate the state of Israel, and they were trying to develop the means to do so. That's one part. Second part is that Iran has been conducting, and what I might say is a pretty effective strategy of indirect warfare against Israel. They quite cleverly built a series of proxies. The most important one, which failed terribly on the 13th of June, but the most important and powerful and deterring one was Hezbollah in Lebanon, And in addition to that, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, various proxies in Syria up until the time that the regime there fell, and about 20 significant proxies in Iraq, and of course the Houthis in Yemen. What the Iranian regime tried to do was to build that ring of fire around Israel. And on the 7th of October, that ring of fire allegedly exploded or ignited when Hamas attacked Israel unprovoked, killing about 1,300 Israelis, taking 251 hostage, and setting into motion a chain of events that I think culminated on June 13, 2 weeks ago, when Israel struck Iran. And the things are connected. All of the Iranian proxies joined in, some more merrily and more effectively than others. But a year and a half after that fatal act of aggression by Hamas, the Iranian project of proxies is all but destroyed. Not quite yet, and Israel still has work to do. But judging from how they delivered after June 13, very poor military achievements. Hezbollah opted out, they cowered out. The Houthis, they participated, they fired a few drones and 3 ballistic missiles, none of them hit. And no incoming fire from Syria, no significant incoming missiles from Iraq, a few drones were fired. And Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza were busy doing other things, mostly hiding in tunnels as Israeli troops are maneuvering there. So what Israel did on June 13 was, for the first time in a perspective of 25 years, to turn the table and to address Iranian expansionism, Iranian aggression against Israel, and to tell the Iranians that now we're going to deal, and here I come to the part of targets, we're going to deal with 3 essential aspects of what you, the Islamic Republic, has been busy doing. One is your illegal, clandestine, and highly controversial nuclear weapons program. We, Israel, are going to blow it out of the ground, and we're going to make sure that you never have the ability to build a nuclear bomb or to fire it towards Israel. 2, we're going to attack and disable your offensive capabilities, most specifically your ballistic missiles. And 3rd, we are going to put a heavy dent into your ability to continue to fund terror organizations, Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, Houthis, and others that are killing Israelis and forcing us to spend much more than we want on national security. Those 3 goals were the obvious targets. I think I am in agreement with Scott here about one thing, that I think Israel also wishes to see regime change in Iran, but it wasn't the initial target, and it still isn't an official Israeli target. I think it's something that Israel wants to see. I think it's a vision and an aspiration that is shared by many countries in the region, and I think it would be great, but it wasn't an official target, and Israel hasn't really put in any significant effort, except for one evening of strikes at government facilities in Tehran, to see that happen. So to conclude, I would say, the title of our conversation is Who Won the War? Of course, nobody won this war, because it wasn't all out and it wasn't conclusive, and there's still a lot of work to do. If we take stock of the current situation, I would say that militarily, Israel enjoyed tremendous intel, aerial, and operational superiority. The only achievements that the Iranians can claim, if they can claim, is killing 27 Israeli civilians and 1 off-duty Israeli soldier, and inflicting damage to houses and some national infrastructure in Israel. That is a far, far cry from what Israel has been able to achieve with precision-guided strikes based on live and very accurate intel against specific targets, and that were in very close coordination with what Israel was seeking to achieve. So, to summarize, I think that this is a new Middle East now. This is a new balance of power between Israel and the Islamic Republic. The Islamic Republic of Iran, its regime, which was vaunted and cast a long shadow of deterrence through its proxy networks before, has been exposed as incapable of defending itself, its airspace, its territory, its senior personnel, its infrastructure, and its most cherished project, which was the nuclear weapons project.
Scott, I'll let you respond to Jonathan, but also I want to focus on the military achievements of both sides. So the numbers that I have is that Iran had 600 to 900 deaths with 3,000 wounded. They lost 14 nuclear scientists and about 20 senior Iranian military commanders, including top figures in the IRGC and the Quds Force. They, according to the IDF destroyed 2/3 of ballistic missile launchers, about 250 of them, and 1,000 ballistic missiles, which is the second. So there's two threats that Israel determined, or two objectives. One, to destroy nuclear capabilities, and the other one is the ballistic missile threat. So that's commenting on the ballistic missile threat. They've also destroyed 80 Iranian air defense batteries, which allowed them essentially air supremacy or essentially control over Tehran and Western Iran. And they've hit multiple storage depots, airfields, radar installations across Western Iran. Israel says they were wiped out. Now, what Iran did to Israel, they launched 550 ballistic missiles and 1,000 drones. I think all drones were intercepted, and about 90% of ballistic missiles were intercepted. 31 hit, 28 people were killed, 3,000 wounded, and 9,000 Israelis were displaced, 39,000 reported property loss. Based on those numbers, would you say, Scott, it's a fair point to say militarily, moving away from the objectives, which we're going to discuss, destruction of nuclear facilities, whether regime change was an objective, whether Iran will pursue a nuclear weapon more secretly without IAEA monitoring, putting those aside, we'll discuss those afterwards. Militarily, do you think Israel beat your expectations and showed supremacy in the war against Iran, and even can I go as far as say embarrassed Iran with the successes they've had, or you strongly disagree with my statement there, and I think Jonathan's points as well?
Well, first of all, the source of your information seems to be almost exclusively from Western sources, maybe Israeli sources. So
I've only used, I'll just make a quick correction. Most of them were, because Iran didn't share any military casualties.
The point I'm trying to make.
Exactly. Except, so the only source I had, because I wanted to look at both sources.
A lot of funerals, a lot of funerals today.
The only Iran. There's that, but there's also the only information that Iran released, Scott, was the number of people killed. Iran says about 610. Western sources said 900. But otherwise, they didn't share any other information. So yes, they are Israeli and U.S. sources.
But my point is, if you're bragging about killing Iranian civilians, then A, that proves that the Israelis weren't as precise as they claimed to be, and B, yay. I mean, look, Israel has the best military equipment in the world. Much of it is American provided. Some of it modified by Israel for its own use. Israel has, I think there's no doubt about it, one of the better intelligence services in the world. I know, I worked closely with them for 4 years. So if Israel wasn't able to flex its muscles effectively, then shame on Israel. And I think what we saw is Israel flexing its muscles very effectively. We would expect Israel to be able to carry out operations of this nature. So, I mean, because Israel did what it's capable of doing, we're supposed to say, wow, they won the war. War is an extension of politics by other means. Jonathan, you've studied Clausewitz. You know this as well. So if we're going to sit here and just count numbers, then you're looking at the wrong thing. The question is, where are both nations right now in the aftermath of this conflict? That's how you do it. You don't count numbers. First of all, as a former battle damage assessment officer who was involved in Desert Storm, I will tell you right now that the ability to exaggerate the impact of your military is universal. I know for a fact that on week 2 of the Gulf War, we had killed 64 Iraqi Scud launchers, and we were adamant about it. We had the pilots, we had the videotape, we had everything, when the reality is we'd killed 0. I'm not saying Israel didn't kill anything. I'm just saying that the numbers that come flowing in from battle damage assessment in the immediate aftermath of conflict oftentimes differ from reality. I know this as somebody who participated in the Gulf War and then had an opportunity to walk the ground in Iraq afterwards and see the actual targets we were hitting. And the difference between reality and what we thought we did was night and day in many cases. Yes, we destroyed a lot of things, but the other thing we learned is the Iraqis are pretty good at evacuating sites. And I would imagine that the Iranians are just as good as evacuating sites. And if you don't know where the evacuation site is, then you really didn't accomplish much, did you? So I think we need to be careful about the numbers game right now. Israel did what it was expected to do. Israel is a very modern force, professional, some of the best pilots in the world. best intelligence. If they didn't do this, then there's a problem. But Iran survived. Iran survived, and Iran continued to fire missiles up until the final day. I mean, their final barrage was a devastating barrage. And it's something that Iran, I think, is prepared to continue if necessary. So this isn't a case where Iran was crawling to the negotiating table. In fact, if I remember, it's Benjamin Netanyahu was making the phone call to the United States saying, we need to stop this thing now, because there's other factors at play, like, I know, maintenance of F-35s. It's very difficult to maintain this combat, sortie rate with maintenance. The Israelis were exhausted. They were exhausted politically. It was very difficult for the Israeli government to explain what was happening. And you shake your head, no, Jonathan, but I mean, why did you shut your borders? Why did you shut down the media?
What do you base that on, Scott? Being on the ground? Do you speak Hebrew?
Oh, I don't speak any word of Hebrew. No, I don't speak Arabic. I don't speak Farsi. I speak American English. That's it.
Okay. So with all due respect, you're quite limited, and I don't think you should be commenting on Israeli society or whether or not.
I was there for 4 years. I know Israeli society pretty well during wartime.
I don't think you do. I don't think you do. And if you say that you do without knowing the language or the culture, I think that really puts in question your judgment and your ability about everything else that you say. I don't think that I understand Iranian society. I don't think that I have a good handle on the Iranian opposition or the cultural fabric or the ethnic fabric of Iran, because I don't speak their language and I've only studied it a little bit. So I tread very cautiously when I speak about Iranian society. You sitting here and pontificating and lecturing and telling that Israel was on the verge of breaking. Listen, buddy, we've been fighting for a year and a half against some of the most horrible enemies, and Israeli society has been in and out of bomb shelters for the better part of at least a year. And Israelis are still strong. Israel is fighting. We rose up after 12 days of being in shelters, dusted ourselves off, and business is back as usual. Stores are open, and kids are going to school, and people are back at working. So, I want to be respectful here, and, I wouldn't challenge your credentials as a battle damage assessment officer. I don't know, it was a long time ago since you served, and you've done other things since then. But I would, think you should be a little bit more careful when you assess or pass judgment about things that I don't think you have access to raw information and you have very limited knowledge about. I think that's like a professional remark.
Jonathan, just a question on the.
Let me just push back a little bit, Mario. I just want to say, there's much about me you don't know. Now, I know you were an IDF spokesperson, and if you did work in the IDF, did you go and look at my file that you guys have on me? Do you know that I worked with the Israeli Amman intimately for 4 years, and I spent a lot of time in Israel visiting the homes, talking to the highest levels of Israeli society? I was in Israel every time I visited, Hamas attacked, and I know how resilient they are. I was there when Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. So I've been in Israel. I've been in the homes. I've mourned with the Israelis. The Israelis were my friends, and some of them I would still consider to be my friends. But so be careful when you say that I don't know anything.
Many years ago, again, that may be true. I've read other things about.
No, it is true. It's not maybe true.
Okay, that's fine. I don't have any information that suggests otherwise. I've read other things about you, but that doesn't matter. We're here discussing a professional topic. And just as I won't, sit here with high level of certainty and claim things and say things that I really don't have a good understanding of, I don't think you should be doing either. You don't speak Hebrew. I don't know when you visited here last time. I know that you definitely weren't here during the war. That's for certain. And I don't know what you base your assessment of. I don't know when was the last time you saw an intel dossier from the US or from Israel. But my guess is that it was many, many years ago, probably before 2011, maybe before that. I don't know. You were in service a long time ago. And yes, while having historical reference about the Iraq War and your experience on the ground and whatever it was that you did here in Israel, that's relevant, I think. But I think, a bit of professional courtesy or some not to be so sure about your assessments without really having access to intel is in place.
So, Jonathan, the next thing I want to move on,
that's fair. Let me just push
I'll let you respond, and then we'll go to the nuclear facilities. Yes, go ahead.
You didn't address the issue of war. You talked about the threat that Israel was under. You spoke about Hamas. I think many people, including myself, would say that it came out of the blue. There's a lot of people that feel that Israel has behaved egregiously against the Palestinian people over time, that Gaza was occupied territory. So there's several interpretations about what happened October 7th, Hezbollah and all this. But be that as it may, I did spend a lot of time in the United Nations. You know what doesn't change over time, Jonathan? International law. And the Charter of the United Nations, especially the requirements under Article 2, Paragraph 4, Israel, you can't sit there and claim that Iran poses an existential threat and not make the case before the United Nations. You can't launch an attack without doing the due process, because therefore you have committed an illegal act of aggression, which makes you war criminals by definition. If you're going to say Iran is a threat, then you have to speak about the imminence of that threat. And there's no way you can make a cognizable argument about the imminent threat of Iran's nuclear program at a time when it was under full monitoring from the IAEA. The IAEA itself says there's no evidence of a nuclear weapons program. And the United States was engaged in negotiations to resolve these issues. You can't say they were a threat worthy of a surprise attack.
So let me address that. And I think that's an important point. I spent some time at the UN as well. I served there 3 years on behalf of my country in peacekeeping operations. And I got an insider's view, the belly of the beast from an Israeli perspective, at exactly how corrupt and how abysmal that organization is. I wouldn't say it with pride that I was part of the UN, and I would challenge the wisdom for anybody else to say that I served at the UN, especially in some parts of it, but I'll leave that aside. I think you address an important topic of legality, and yes, technically that may be so. I have some medium knowledge of international law, and maybe according to procedure, etc., you could make that case. I know who is making that case, the Iranians. But I think it's interesting to see that Israel, as a country which is used to being at the receiving end of almost non-stop condemnations from countries around the world for what it does and doesn't do, whether it is against Hamas or Hezbollah or Iranians or Palestinians or whatever, we're used to being condemned for a lot of things. But what I found interesting was that when Israel struck on June 13, the French, the Germans, the Brits, the Americans, and quite a lot of other countries, Arabs included, actually didn't invoke that kind of rhetoric and didn't, do the let's be sticklers for details here and let's do procedures through the Security Council. And I think that's interesting, and I think it's telling because that is the understanding of so many countries around the world and in the region, that the Islamic Republic was a threat not only to Israel, first and foremost to Israel, but to regional stability, and they were a global menace. Missiles that the Iranians still have, unfortunately, but they had many more of them, are capable of reaching Europe. And I'm sure that they would have been capable of developing weapons that would reach continental US as well, had it not been for what Israel did now and the damage that Israel inflicted on their missile industry. And another thing that I think is important, we speak about the UN Security Council and legality of actions. I think and this is a bit of it goes beyond the scope of our discussion, but I think it's really important. I don't know when really the last time that anything meaningful came out of a Security Council discussion when it wasn't vetoed by any of the 5 permanent members, and when the UN took a step, UN as an organization that took a step forward that really alleviated suffering or helped or untangled some kind of sensitive political situation. I've been following UN peacekeeping for a long time. I've been listening to the Security Council and monitoring things there. I say this with significant sadness. I wish the state of affairs was different when it comes to the UN. I think it has lost much, if not all, of its legitimacy. As an Israeli, when I look at anything that has the 2 letters UN in front of it, the level of skepticism towards whatever it is that the people or anybody that is part of that organization is saying is tremendously high. And I don't think that I'm the only one. I think that many, many Americans have the same sense of hostility and disgust and contempt for various UN programs, resolutions, the General Assembly, Security Council, and the various entities on the ground, like UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency that is in the Middle East, that in my mind is just a travesty of an organization that eternalizes suffering. And I think that even though this isn't the topic of the conversation, and I'll end with this, I think that there is a real room to do significant an overhaul of the UN, because it is simply not working, not serving its purpose, and doing a tremendous disservice and not uplifting its charter.
So, gentlemen, I want to move to a separate point, and that's the nuclear facility. Scott, you mentioned that there's been reports that 300,000, 400,000 kilograms of enriched uranium was smuggled out of how much? 40,000, sorry, 40,000.
400 kilograms. Yeah.
400 kilograms.
Sorry, 400 kilograms of enriched uranium was smuggled out of the facilities. Now, that hasn't been confirmed. I'm not sure who reported that, but I know there's been reports that they were not able to account for that enriched uranium. Does that essentially lead, if that's true, number one, and Jonathan, maybe you could comment on whether this is true and what Israeli intelligence has pointed towards. And if it is true, wouldn't that mean that the operation was essentially a failure, considering this is the main objective of Israel?
Is this to me or to Jonathan?
Jonathan, just regarding in the Israeli stance from an Israeli intelligence perspective.
Okay, so I think that's a pretty straightforward, even with the necessary caution of, as Scott said correctly in the beginning, we don't know. For credible information to emerge from a battlefield, from a war zone, we need time, we need people on the ground, we need independent verification. That's difficult to get by in a country like Iran, an oppressive society that obfuscates and is not transparent. So it's going to take time. But of course, Israel and other countries, the US, are very busy applying a lot of attention, different sensors into finding out exactly what happened at Fordo, at Natanz, at Isfahan, Arak, Tabriz, many other places. And the issue here of the so-called missing enriched material is, of course, one of those action items or the intelligence requirements that are pretty high up on the list. Let's say, for discussion's sake, that what Rossi, the chairman of the Atomic Agency, commented on, that we currently are not aware of the whereabouts. I think that was his wording. Let's say that is indeed the case, and that Israel doesn't know and the US doesn't know where it is, even though both Israeli and US officials have indicated that the assessment is that the material, most of the material, was in Fordo, and that the Iranians stashed it there because they believed it was safe there and the place was impenetrable and they were not able to get it out. What supports that assessment is the fact that Israel struck Fordo with quite a significant salvo after the American strike on the location, and Israel focused its strikes on the entrance and exit points to the location, perhaps indicating that Israel wanted to make sure that nobody would be able to excavate in and out and extract material from there. But let's say that the Iranians were able to sneak away the material, and that Israel, which I think demonstrated pretty compelling intel capabilities in this strike, but let's say that Israel missed that, even though it's very high up on the priorities list. But let's say that Israel missed it. Let's say that Israel doesn't know. In order to have for that to be meaningful, then Iran needs to have a significant, large amount of advanced centrifuges to be able to turn that into something that can be used. And most importantly, they need to have the conversion facility at Isfahan that converts it from one state to another state, whether it's from metal to gas or from gas to metal. But the conversion state is absolutely crucial. I think there's no discussion that Isfahan's and Natanz were destroyed, obliterated. In this sense, I think it's pretty clear. Maybe Scott has a different perspective, but I think that's pretty clear. Above ground, and the infrastructure was destroyed. So whether or not there's missing material, that's open for debate, and we'll wait for final information about it, or more trustworthy information about it. But even if they have it, what will they do with it if they don't have the conversion facility that is absolutely crucial, physically crucial, in order to turn it into something that can be used as part of a nuclear weapon?
Scott, you were pretty critical of that assessment, and that was before the leak that came out from the Defense Intelligence Agency, or alleged leak, that said that the centrifuges are largely intact. Also, that enriched uranium, 400 kilograms, it didn't mention a number, was moved out of the sites prior to the US strikes. Back then, we saw that footage of the trucks that were at, I think it was Fordo at the time, before the US strike. And that leak, according to the intelligence arm, alleges that the US only set back Iran only by a few months. So maybe expand on that leak and your take on the response from the White House, Pete Hegseth, and Trump, who vehemently disagreed and said that the nuclear facilities were completely destroyed or obliterated.
Well, first of all, we don't know what the standard of facility destruction is, meaning, what standard is the president referring to? But completely obliterated in the plain English means totally eliminated. So if there is structural integrity below ground, the two enrichment halls remain intact, and the centrifuge cascades that were installed there remain operable once power is brought back up, then I think that's sort of contraindicative to the term obliterated. We don't know what the status is of the material inside. And my problem is when the president makes a statement like that, it's a political statement. It's not a militarily, a sufficient statement, especially when we start talking about what Iran's capabilities are today, because it seems to be hiding something. When you start to politicize intelligence, it means that you're creating a subterfuge to distract people from reality. And the reality is that Iran's nuclear enrichment program has not been eliminated. Jonathan spoke about large numbers of centrifuges. No, Jonathan, all they need is 328 configured in 264 cascades linked with a special adapter. And they've been producing these advanced centrifuges, IR6s, IR4s, without accounting since 2021. We also know that starting in 2005, 2006, the Iranians, concerned about the potential of an American strike against its nuclear facilities and an Israeli strike, began taking measures to preserve their technical base. So if you think for a moment that Iran hasn't thought about how to preserve metal conversion technology, how to preserve centrifuges, preserve the uranium hexafluoride enriched to 400 to 60%, to 400 kilograms, which isn't that much. In Fordo, I think there's a giant uranium hexafluoride tank that holds 2,000 kilograms of basic feedstock that goes in there. That wasn't moved. Yeah, look. Let me make this as easy as possible. Let's say I'm going to concur right now. Natanz is not functional. It's been destroyed. Isfahan is not functional. It's been destroyed. Fordo is definitely not functional because regardless of what's underground, the entrances have been sealed off by whom, by the way? Not by Israeli bombs, but by the Iranians who shoved dirt and everything into that entrance. I think to keep Shaldog commandos from going in there and blowing it up like they did a facility in Syria back in September. If you're going to seal it up, do you put your most valuable assets in a coffin and bury it in a grave, or do you remove your most valuable assets? And given the Iranian history of being prepared for this sort of thing, I think you need to weigh in on the side of these people were prepared, they had a plan, and they implemented the plan. And now we have a situation where we don't know. And that's the worst situation you want to be in. We've also created a verification nightmare. Let's say, hypothetically, the Iranians agreed tomorrow. They said, zero enrichment. Bring everybody in, and let's begin the process of verification. The fact that so much destruction has been done means there's going to be massive gaps. I know this because I did this for 8 years or 7 years in Iraq. When you start blowing things up, You make verification virtually impossible. And if you blow up documents, I think the Israelis were bragging about blowing up the Iranian archive. So you've blown up documentary evidence, you blowed up physical evidence. Iran will never be able to satisfy Israel or the United States so long as the regime's in place. So now we see the trap that's been set. It's the same trap that was set with Saddam Hussein to create a mission impossible. Even if Iran wanted to, and right now, according to the Iranian officials, they don't want to give up their enrichment. Even if they wanted to, they'll never be allowed to, because this was never about enrichment. This was always about regime change. As Jonathan said, they want that regime gone. And this is a game plan that they've implemented in the past.
Wouldn't you, if you were sitting where I'm sitting in Tel Aviv, and you'd been facing attacks by terrorist organizations that were funded by Iran, if you would have heard in various languages that the aim of that country, Iran, is to destroy my country, and let's say for a second you're an Israeli, you hear that, you sustain the attacks, your friends and family are attacked, your country is attacked almost relentlessly, and then that same country goes about trying to produce nuclear weapons. What would your take? Would you just say, well, I'm fine with that regime existing with those outspoken goals? Do you think that's a rational thing for us to agree to?
I've never once attacked you for holding that position. You are an Israeli citizen, and you have every right to speak out in the manner that you do. That's a viable perspective on the part of an Israeli. Now, imagine for a second, though, I'm an Iranian citizen, and I'm looking at Israel. It's not a hypothetical nuclear weapons program. You have nuclear weapons. I know it's plausible deniability, but you have nuclear weapons. You're not a signatory to the NPT, and you threaten everybody with the so-called Samson option. So right off the bat, we got an issue there. You have attacked my country, assassinated my leaders, assassinated my scientists for decades now. When was the last time Iran attacked Israel physically with an Iranian asset? Up until this time, never. But now Israel has been attacking
October 24 and April 24, the last time that they attacked. Yes.
Okay, True Promise. You're right. True Promise and True Promise 2. Self-defense act because of Israeli acts of aggression. So, again,
depends how you spin it. The acts of aggression.
I'm saying that
one
man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So, as an American and as somebody who believes in the Charter of the United Nations, I know you don't, but I find that interesting because it was from the United Nations that Israel was born. Now to reject your parents, so to speak, is a fascinating
born out of 3,000 years of history in this country and documented archaeology. That's how we were born. The official, international stamp, indeed, General Assembly that voted, but Israel was born long, long before the UN and most other civilizations that exist today.
I can't get involved in a theocratic discussion. I respect your position on that. I'm not here to attack the state of Israel, its origins, etc., except to say that there are many people who disagree with this, but that's not the purpose of this debate today. Here we're talking about Iran in a war with Iran. And I will just say that, you mentioned all the nations that didn't condemn Israel for its Pearl Harbor type attack. Well, these are nations that have traditionally sided with Israel on the case of genocide, accusations of genocide, things of that nature. You know who did speak out, though? Russia, China, Pakistan. Much the nations, pardon?
The luminaries of international law and civil rights. I mean, tell me that your friends are China, Russia, and Pakistan, and I'll tell you that you're a great guy. Law and order, civil society, women's rights, minorities, respect for liberties. Say no more.
Well, look. I live in the United States where we have many problems, and I'm not going to sit here and say my society is perfect, but you have to respect the fact that many people view what you're doing in Gaza as genocidal, and that's sort of the ultimate war crime. You've killed tens of thousands of Palestinians, but again, we're not here to discuss that. I just wouldn't start throwing accusations out against nations who are talking about Article 51.
But really, Scott, when you claim that the benchmark of who's criticizing us is China, Russia, and Pakistan, that is in itself probably the worst line of attack that you could come with, because these are some of the most notorious offenders of anything that's holy. Minorities, liberties, civil rights, the same things that are enshrined in the beautiful Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, the things that you and I probably share that we hold dear. when you claim that China, Russia, and Pakistan are critical of Israel, that tells me that we're doing exactly what we should be doing.
Jonathan, do you
Well,
worry
I just
after
want
these
to,
attacks?
Mario, let me just quick say in here,
please.
I haven't been to China and I haven't been to Pakistan. I've read about them, but I agree. You know, if you haven't walked in their shoes, don't. I've been to Russia extensively. I actually speak the Russian language, and I find your description of Russia insulting. I think most Russians would too. If you haven't been to Russia, if you don't speak the Russian language, maybe you shouldn't start throwing around accusations to the Russians about what kind of society they have, because I've been there. And it's a pretty damn good society.
Political rights, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, opposition.
I would say as long as you're not taking CIA money, you can assemble and speak freely. But if you're taking CIA money for the purpose of undermining the Russian government, you might run into a problem with Russian law enforcement.
Jonathan, just another quick question here.
Okay.
Do you worry that,
I'm sure that your FBI would be interested in what you're saying, but I'll leave that to them.
Well, the CIA and I have a long and interesting relationship. They know damn well where I stand on these issues. So does the FBI. So I'm not worried about it because, again, I'm an American citizen. I live in a land where the freedom of speech is enshrined in the First Amendment. And so long as we believe in constitutional law, that's applies. Just like sort of like the Charter of the United Nations is an important document to believe in as well.
Jonathan, I want to bring you back.
Russia, you don't live in Pakistan, you don't live in China. If you would have said any of those things in any of those countries, then you wouldn't be sitting and having a conversation on X. You'd be doing other things, if at all. But okay.
So, Jonathan, just another question. Do you worry that the attacks by Israel could encourage Iran? We've got the 400 kilograms that is unaccounted for. We've also got reports that there is other enriched uranium other than this 400 kilograms that wasn't in any of those three facilities. Obviously, it's all speculation. We don't have the assurance. Difficult to comment on things we don't know. But do you worry that Iran now is more driven to build a nuclear weapon than it was a few days ago or 2 weeks ago? We have the parliament voted 221-0 to suspend their work with the IAEA, which is the UN nuclear watchdog. Obviously that decision lies with the supreme leader. So that's just a vote for them. That's what they wish to achieve if that gets approved. Does that concern you, though? Do we have a more dangerous Iran in their mind, in the Iranian minds, like, hey, we have a nuclear weapon to deter an Israeli attack. That's why we need a nuclear weapon to allow the regime to survive. Then one could make the argument like, yeah, you could make peace with Israel. Israel will not attack. There's enough deterrence with the missiles, with the proxies. But now that's been broken. Israel did attack Iran. Militarily, one could argue that it was a very successful attack. Then Iran will be like, hold on, now we need to build a nuclear weapon for our survival so this doesn't happen again. Does that concern you as an unintended consequence?
Yeah, so I think it's a topic of concern. I'll tell you what I'm more concerned with is how the Iranians will now, again, they're very good at negotiations. I have very high professional respect for Iranian negotiators and for their foreign service. I think they have very good diplomats. They are crafty. They are tenacious. They have a good understanding of international law. They lie exceedingly well, and they are not tethered by truth or anything that is a limiting factor. And they have a good, solid, clear strategy which they pursue with good effectiveness. And I think that credit to Iranian decision making, or credit to Iranian negotiators for over so long being able to extend the time that was made available by the international community led by the US and the E3 countries for them to be able to build a bomb. The tactic or the strategy was waste time with negotiations while the Iranian scientists and the defense establishment continues to make advances in order to build the bomb. And they did that very well. What I'm concerned about now is that the Iranians will go back to employing those similar type of tactics, and that out of short-sightedness or other issues, lack of focus or whatever it will be, that the US will fall into those traps and allow the Iranian regime some wiggle room and not implement a super strict binding agreement that makes sure that Iran never ever will have the ability to enrich on Iranian soil, and that the Iranians say, not only are we not going to have a military program, which of course they've been lying about for the last 20 years, the Ahmad or Imad nuclear weapons program. But we are not going to try to enrich on Iranian soil. And we are open and transparent, and there will be as many international verifiers or inspectors as needed. I think that's what's needed in order to make sure that Iran isn't going to sprint for a bomb. Will Israel's attack on Iran perhaps harden the hardliners? It can happen. But at the end of the day, with the information available now, I think that Iran has been weakened so significantly militarily, and the most crucial tools have been taken out of their hands, that even if they are hardened, I think they have very few actual venues to express that those sentiments, and I don't think that they will really have the ability to sprint. I can assure you that Mossad and IDF will be focusing sizable assets exactly on this, to understand if there's anything that Israel has missed, if there are residual capabilities, if the Iranians built a totally unknown Fordo facility somewhere else in Iran, if they have a conversion facility that is a duplicate of Isfahan or whatever they were doing in Natanz, and if there's any other new activity that the Iranians have that we didn't know about. And of course, in war, you should always assume, in life as well, you should always assume that there's lots that you don't know, and you have to be vigilant and always overestimate the capabilities of your enemy and not to underestimate them. We underestimated Hamas, and we got the October 7 massacre. I think we correctly estimated Iranian capabilities. We collected intelligence for about 20 years. We assessed it. We prepared. We drilled with our Air Force, and we did lots of other things. And Mossad did some pretty amazing stuff. And the result was that we were successful in unprecedented military endeavors. But going back to your question, I think the risk exists. It is a possibility. I think the likelihood of that happening is moderate or perhaps below, but there is obviously no room for complacency with anything that regards the Islamic Republic and the crazy regime that currently governs it.
Scott, I'd love you to comment on this as well. And you did talk in our last interview about a grand bargain, an opportunity for a grand bargain. Do you think this could, playing devil's advocate, could this lead to a deal with the US, Iran, that ends their nuclear program but offers them other forms of security, or that it has become a lot more elusive now?
Look, this is up to Iran. I mean, Iran has to make the decision what it wants to do with enrichment. If Iran wants to agree to zero enrichment, I do believe that there's a grand bargain to be had with the United States, but not with Israel. Again, I believe that Israel is committed to a regime change path. Let me just give you a little war story here. At the end of Desert Storm, after the international community had come together to hold Iraq accountable to get disarmament, the Israeli government made a decision that they wouldn't accept the disarmament, that the big threat was Saddam Hussein. And so Uri Sagai, who was the director of military intelligence after the war, put a plan forward to assassinate Saddam. And that plan was actually about to be implemented in November of 1993. They were doing a final dress rehearsal when an accident occurred. I can't call it a training accident, but the rehearsal accident killed 5 Israeli soldiers, and they terminated that operation, but not their intent to kill Saddam. I went to Israel in October of 1994 and met with Uri Sagai, where I said, look, rather than seek regime change, why don't you give us a chance, give weapons inspectors a chance to do our job? And, we can't close the books until Israel agrees that there are no weapons of mass destruction. And he went to the leadership, and the leadership came back and said, yeah, we're willing to do this. And for the next 4 years, we worked with the Israelis and everybody else to fundamentally disarm Iraq. By the time I left in June of 1998, that was my last visit to Israel, Iraq had went from the #1 threat down to, I think, number 8. And the man in Amman, their intelligence service, who was supposed to be the guy who knew about Saddam, went from viewing Saddam as this irrational actor that had to be assassinated and removed to Saddam being a rational actor who could be dealt with and Israel could live in peace and harmony with, so long as he didn't have weapons of mass destruction. That shows what engagement can do. So I'm hopeful that there's a grand bargain out there that could finally convince the Israelis not to go after Ali Khamenei and seek regime change. I don't know, but I know this. As long as Iran seeks to talk about having any enrichment capability, Israel at this point in time won't accept that. And it appears that the United States won't accept it at all. But then I also need to reflect on this. I mean, again, Jonathan, you're an Israeli citizen. I respect any citizen of any nation who stands up and defends their country, no matter how vociferously I disagree with them. You're doing your duty as a patriot of Israel. But you do know that Iran is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and Israel is not. Iran has every right under Article 4 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty to have an enrichment program. And all the problems that existed about Iran, covert acquisition, which was brought upon by illegal sanctions against Iran, which were in violation of Article 4, were rectified through the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2015. Indeed, the IAEA, together with the Security Council of the United Nations, closed the books on Iran's militarization programs. Then the United States precipitously withdrew from that and began a process of, the deterioration of the JCPOA. But Iran has never violated its safeguards agreement with the IAEA. Iran has walked away from the JCPOA because there's no reason to implement it if they're not going to get the benefit of it, which is trade, et cetera. But I just find it interesting because I worked, again, as a UN weapons inspector, I worked intimately with the Israeli government. You don't have an idea how intimately it was. I would meet with the Israeli ambassador in Vienna together with the IAEA action team, and we would share intelligence about Iraq's nuclear program. Now, you would say, okay, that's what we're doing today about Iran. The difference is, when I was meeting with the Israeli ambassador, Iraq had been determined to be a nation that cannot have a nuclear weapons program. And for Iraq to pursue a nuclear weapons program or any nuclear program was a violation of international law. So there was no contradiction in that meeting. Today, Grossi, the Director General, has been working hand in glove with the Israeli government to conspire against a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that the IAEA itself says is not in non-compliant. That last document to put out there, it's technical stuff that even Grossi says has nothing to do with the weaponization program at all. So I just find it interesting that Israel seems to be in a position where it wants to lecture Iran about the NPT and adherence to the NPT. When you have a nuclear weapons program, you won't declare, you won't subject to international inspections, and you won't even sign the NPT. And this is maybe Israel's fatal flaw in this whole thing, because the world now sees Israel for what it is.
I don't think
nation
that it
state, a rogue state that has nuclear weapons and refuses to adhere to international law.
No, I don't agree with you, and I think you're wrong on so many things. First is that you believe what the Iranians are saying. They lie, and they lie continuously. They obfuscate, they mislead, they misinform, and except for in addition to the fact that they're probably the world's biggest state supporter of terrorism, that they fund terror organizations that are fighting against Israel, and again, officially say in Farsi, not for people like you to understand, but for others to understand, that their goal is to annihilate my country. Now, I take that seriously, especially after October 7, when a much smaller and less potent enemy said that, Hamas said that for a few years, and they said, we are going to invade Israel, and we're going to kill as many Jews, and we're going to resettle Tel Aviv or Yaffo and Haifa and Jerusalem. And many Israelis didn't, pay much attention to that. I think after that event, I think we have to really listen to what our enemies are saying. And I think you'll excuse me for not being impressed with words when there is a clear and present danger to my country, to my people, to my family, which isn't being dealt with effectively by other means. So Iran, to me, is a rogue state. It is a country, it is a regime that oppresses its own people. It is a regime that prioritizes external violence and terrorism and building a nuclear weapons program over its own citizens, over the well-being of its own citizens. Today in Iran, there's an acute water shortage. There's a very limited supply and irregular supply of electricity in many provinces. Many of the schools are shut. Even though Iran is a country blessed with tremendous resources, gas and oil specifically, and the ability to generate hydroelectricity with lots of rivers and mountains, their whole system isn't working. Why? Because the Islamic Republic, the regime, the crazy people that lead that are taking it on an extremely dangerous path, which is based on this religiously fueled hatred against Israel and on this quest to destroy the state of Israel. And they've been harnessing, or they've been allocating so many resources in order to do that. They've thrown billions of dollars at Hezbollah in order to keep Israel busy and to deter Israel from attacking Iran. They've funded Hamas, Islamic Jihad, about between 10 and 15 proxy organizations in Syria, and another 18, 20 in Iraq. They're funding the Houthis. For what aim? Not for doing good to anybody, not for promoting progress or anything effective in Iran, just for trying to attack Israel. And I think that Israel is not only doing the right thing, but very, very justified at, for the first time, taking the battle back to Iran. Iran is the aggressor. Israel hasn't built proxies around Iran's border, and Israel isn't attacking Iranian civilians with those proxies. And we have not been doing that for the last 25 years. Iran has been doing that. Israel has not said that it wants to destroy the Islamic Republic of Iran. Never said it. We don't have a countdown in Tel Aviv saying from 2040 we wish to annihilate the Islamic Republic of Iran. No, we never have, and my guess is that we never will. What Israel wants is to live in its own land without any terror organization funded by an extremist regime that doesn't respect minorities, that doesn't respect civil liberties and rights, that doesn't allow any political freedoms, and it is an oppressive and cruel and brutal regime. We don't want that regime attacking us. And what Israel did on June 13 was, for the first time, to show the Iranians that their aggression against Israel now finally comes at a cost, that there is a price to pay for funding terrorists. There's a price to pay to providing the Houthis with ballistic missiles and drones that are fired at Israel. There's a price to pay for arming Shiite militias in southern Lebanon, specifically Hezbollah, that have killed thousands of Israelis. And there's a price to pay for flooding Palestinian terrorist organizations with weapons in order to kill Jews. And that price has now come and become more materialized. And I think that moving forward here, and this is where it becomes interesting, I agree with you, the ball is in the Iranian court. They will have to decide how they take it from here. I think that they have a very different hand of cards than what they had 2 or 3 weeks ago. Maybe they had a strong hand before. I don't think that they have a very strong hand now, militarily speaking. But again, I'm cautious because they're very good negotiators and they're very clever and cunning. But it's in their court and they can decide where this goes from now. And yes, I agree. The existence of that murderous, oppressive regime is definitely something that I think we should be discussing. Is it doing good for the Iranian people? Is it providing prosperity for the people in the region? Or is it hostile? Is it warmongering? Or is it the state sponsor of terrorism? I think that it's the latter three. I think that the world would be much better without that horrible regime, which came into power and under a bloody coup that was supported by external factors. And I think that the Iranian people will be better off, the region will be better off, and I assess that Israel will be better off. So if we are going to talk about the future and goals, etc., yes, I think that the move that Israel did on June 13 will set into motion events that may lead to that happening, but it is not a fait accompli. It can be changed and it can be, stopped. And if the Iranian regime is smart about it and chooses not to escalate, then they buy themselves a lot more time. If they escalate, I think that they will just speed up their own demise. I don't know when it will come. And, I have no ambitions for Israel to be kingmaker or have any decisions about whatever governance there will be in Iran. That's their business. As long as it's not hostile to Israel, I wish them nothing but success. I respect the Iranians. I respect their history, their culture, their previous achievements. They have imperial and real ancient history, a great nation. Jews have existed alongside Persians for about 3 millennia, and I wish them nothing but the best. But they can't be threatening to annihilate my country, and as long as they do, then there will be consequences. Whether it's okay with the NPT or not, I don't think that is the most important thing.
Mario, just allow me a quick response. I would say that, yes, you've articulated the Israeli position very well, as you should. You're a former spokesperson for the IDF, so you've done a very good job. But you do know there's a counter argument. The Palestinian argument, of course, is this began with the Nakba, not on October 7th, and it began with ongoing Israeli oppression, repression, murder, genocide against the Palestinian people. So they might view you as a external threat to their existence. Hezbollah might say that the only reason Hezbollah exists is because of the Israeli invasion occupation of southern Lebanon, 1982, and that it's a resistance organization against continued Israeli aggression. And the Iranians might say that they have a moral obligation to support the Palestinian people, which is why in their constitution it's a requirement. And the Houthi might say that because Israel has been found by the International Court of Justice to be a genocidal state, that there's a duty and responsibility to punish Israel if it continues these behaviors. So all I'm trying to say is that there's yin to your yang out there.
That the Americans are imperialistic and therefore they should kill each and every American. Al-Qaeda said that. And what did the U.S. do? Well, the U.S. fought and is fighting Al-Qaeda. And the same thing goes for Al-Shabaab, and the same thing goes for Jabhat al-Nusra, and for many other extremist Muslim organizations. The fact that they say it doesn't make it true, and the fact that they say it doesn't justify trying to kill civilians or otherwise to attack Israel or anybody else. The fact that they say it that's the only thing that there is. They say it. I think it is inherently wrong. And we can go in a long discussion about
27 dead Israelis versus over 600 dead Iranians. So let's be careful about comparing civilian losses.
Just last quick question, Jonathan. Do you think the regime will come out stronger or weaker over the next few months? Will we see a rally around the flag that we're seeing short term, or will we see a weakening and an opportunity for the opposition to rise up against the regime? What's your take on that, Jonathan and Scott? As a final question.
I'll say that briefly. I think the regime has been pretty effective at undermining any opposition, stifling dissent, and crushing the many brave Iranians, women and men, that have been brave enough to take to the streets and voice their dissatisfaction with the regime, with the dictator, with their state sponsoring of terrorism, and basically with the fact that regime is not delivering. It's not doing good for the Iranian people. They don't have services, they don't have freedoms, and they feel oppressed. And that's why they were out in the street and demonstrating years ago, 2016 and 2022, etc. I think that there's no way of knowing what will happen. Simple logic. I think that the regime today is weaker because it has been exposed as weak and incompetent. I don't think that the Iranian people, and I base this on not on hard assessments, intel, or anything that it's
concrete.
Concrete. But I think that there's tremendous dissatisfaction with that regime, and if people could have another option, then I think they would have wanted to. But the regime is still in power, and they are brutal. They are, I think, with their back against the wall. They know that they've been exposed, and they have already started to clamp down on dissent and collaborators with Mossad and many other things. And they've already executed a few. And I think there are fast proceedings in kangaroo courts to bring about the executions of others, which, by the way, will be broadcast live on Iranian state television in order to intimidate others. But I think that they find themselves in uncharted territory. Does the regime never been as exposed as they were before? And what's very important, and with this I'll conclude, is that in terms of the future prospects, Israel has paved the way, a virtual or an aerial highway to Tehran. And if the Iranians take measures against Israel or do other things that are hostile, and if they continue with their hostile behavior towards Israel, then Israel has the ability to strike. And I think what Israel has done is to shatter that glass ceiling that maybe existed before about Iranian military capabilities, deterrence. They don't have a ring of fire anymore, or at least it didn't work when it was supposed to. They don't have air defenses. They've been penetrated wide and long by Mossad and Israeli intel, and they weren't able to defend their skies. So if I were an Iranian Revolutionary Guard or in the Quds Force or IRGC or Basij, not having a good day and not overly optimistic about the future.
Scott?
I mean, what can you say? The facts are the facts. I would say this, though. Mossad spent 20 years building this tremendous capability that proved to be very effective on the opening night and continued to be effective throughout. It appears that that's unraveling. I don't think holding Mossad agents accountable for their behavior, their actions by Iran is indicative of a miscarriage of justice. Any nation would execute people of this nature. They've betrayed Iran. They are working for an enemy. So, it is what it is. But that capability is gone. You shot that bolt, and unless Mossad's sitting on another 20-year project that they haven't displayed yet, the next time this goes around, and Mario, there is not going to be a grand bargain. There's going to be another conflict. Why? Because, as Jonathan said, it's regime change. They want this regime gone. They won't stop until it's gone, and Iran will not give up its enrichment capability. Jonathan is right. The Iranians are very good negotiators, and I think you'll see the Iranians buy as much time as possible while they reconstitute. I take lessons from American military history. The Battle of Kasserine Pass. We got our asses handed to us by the Germans, and we learned. And next time we took on the Germans, we did better, then we did better, then we did better, and then we won. Iran has learned a lot of lessons here. Israel shot its bolt. There ain't too many ways you can fly an F-35. There ain't too many ways you can fly an F-15I or an F-16S. And the Israelis did it all. And now the Iranians are absorbing this information, and they will attempt to build better defenses. What we do know is that, I think history will show that the efficacy of the Israeli ballistic missile defense shield wasn't quite what the Israeli government says. I think there's more than 31 impacts. I can just go to videotape and count more than that. But be that as it may, what Israel proved is that Iran, it can't defend itself against Iranian missiles, that Iranian missiles will do damage. So Iran knows it has a capability that can penetrate the Israelis. What improvements are you going to make? The Arrow 4, the Arrow 5, David's slingshot, THAAD Plus. No, you've got what you've got, and the Iranians have shown they can defeat it. So I think what's going to happen now is Iran's going to be playing a game of delay. They're going to turn this into a legal issue. You're going to see Russia and China working with them at the UN to isolate Israel. I think the IAEA is going to become a battlefield where Israel's non-compliance, refusal to sign becomes an issue as we talk about how to move forward. You can drag this thing out forever, how to get inspectors back in. But the bottom line is sometime in the future, Iran is going to say, we will never give up our enrichment. And then it's basically come to Jesus time. Will Israel continue its attacks? Will the United States participate in it? Iran didn't play its ultimate weapon. They didn't shut down the Strait of Hormuz. They didn't blow up oil facilities.
Because it would have been a fatal and suicidal mission. They didn't do it because they didn't have the capacity to, not because they were benign or cool-headed. They didn't do it.
I'd like to believe that we dodged a bullet here. I'd like to believe
it would have been shot out of the water and sunk, and it would have happened pretty quickly. They have no air cover. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered by American vessels in the region. They could have perhaps shot it down for a few minutes and made a statement of it, but then all the missile boats, all the missile launchers on coast, and anything else that would have moved, but on the Iranian side would have been, I think, attacked effectively because they have no air cover and America was prepared. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't do it in the future. They can do it in the future once U.S. pulls out its battle groups and maybe Israel will be busy with other things. They can. But the only thing where I don't agree, where I really think that you're wrong on it, yes, the Iranians won't agree to let go of their pipe dreams of having nuclear weapons. Yes, they won't change their aspiration to annihilate the state of Israel. But the only difference is here, now they're not in the same negotiating situation. They don't have the cards that they have. There's no ring of fire around Israel, and Iran is open and exposed. That is different for the Iranians, and it means that in terms of obfuscating, delaying, and all of the other tactics that they deployed very successfully, they're not going to work as well. And I think Israel is going to speed things up and apply military and diplomatic pressure to bring that about, because the time is ticking for Israel as well, politically and militarily. And Israel will want to capitalize here and not wait for the Iranians to draw out, obfuscate, play for time, and do the things that they excel at.
Look,
Scott,
Israel will do what Israel do, but let me just leave. Finish this thought. You don't play the same game twice. Okay. I mean, if you and I are playing a match, Jonathan, whether it's soccer or football, I'll build up a game plan. I'll play you. Let's say you beat me. So the next time I play you, I'm not coming in with my same game plan, and you're not going to come in with your same game plan. Whatever happens down the road is going to be completely different than what happened. And I think you're looking at Russia and China becoming far more mobilized, that you're going to see that Israel is going to be running into far more resistance from Russia and China going forward. And it's going to be a completely different game. So we'll see what the future holds. But I don't believe there's a grand bargain in the making.
Pardon? I think the Iranians wish that, but I don't think that's going to be the reality. The Iranians have just accused the Russians of being unreliable partners. And that's a big statement coming from strategic allies. And China, except for a few unexplained flights that came in the first days of the war, I didn't see them do anything of substance. So maybe that will happen. I don't think so. And if that's what you think will save the Iranians from their fate, then by all means, let's leave it at that, because I don't think that is a strategic fallback to have.
Gentlemen, really appreciate your time. Scott, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.